What do I really want to do? I want to work with people on their personal brands because that's what I've always done. They don't necessarily want to be famous, they have the goods. And when you have the goods, don't need the hype.
All right, so welcome to the show. I'm pumped to have you here, and I know you've got a tremendous amount of business experience, so I'm pumped to dive into that part. But very first thing I'd love to know is what is a holistic business coach, or a holistic brand therapist? I believe is the proper
Yeah.
term that you.
Yeah. And,
What does
and
that mean?
well, it's great to be with you, Jim. Thank you. And yeah, so originally I was calling it holistic brand therapy. Now I call it holistic brand transformation because where the therapy part comes in is that it's really a very high touch, uh, you know, deep dive look at who you are and what your brand is because it's personal branding for the most part. Um, and holistic means that let's say you're a landscaper, but you're also an artist, and you also are an investor and a philanthropist, right? So the personal brand is the 360 view, the holistic view of everything that you are and do, and we come up with a way of conveying that in a really concise and direct manner. So it's challenging for people. A lot of us walk into a party and somebody says, "What do you do?" Well, if you're a court stenographer, it's pretty easy. You say, "I'm a court stenographer." If you're a dentist, you say, "I'm a dentist." But if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a founder, if you're a consultant or a scientist working in a certain area, creating something, you know, the more intricate what you do is, the more complicated it becomes to explain yourself. And so I take a holistic view because I also feel like a lot of people want to separate themselves maybe from their business a little bit. Somebody has a business. If they're in that landscaping business, they don't want to be just known as Bob the landscaper.
Right.
They want to be able to say, "Oh, now I'm starting a new venture. Now I'm doing this. Now I'm doing," and if they're not building up their personal brand at the same time that they're building their business, then it's very hard. Then they want to exit the business, let's say, and now it can't run without them. It's so completely tied to them. That's a big founder problem. So I take a global view, a 360 view of who they are and what are their assets as I describe them, and shape the brand that way, and often work with them with their company as well. In other words, they may have a branding uh, partner or a market CMO or a marketing company or even an ad agency and all that, but I will work to make sure that this founder's brand and their corporate brand or consumer brand are aligned but separate, have their own
Right.
voices.
I love that. And I love the example you gave there. Hey, what do you do? Right? Because most people will just answer with a label. I'm a
Yeah,
landscaper. And it's very dismissive. Right? Most people don't really even think about it, but they just put a label on themselves, say, I'm a teacher, I'm a firefighter, I'm whatever. They just put themselves into a category because it doesn't really describe them. Right. And I think
yeah,
part of the problem there, at least from what I've seen, I'd love to hear your perspective, is a lot of people don't really know who they are as a whole anyway. So it's easier for them to just say, I'm a landscaper because they haven't necessarily figured out who am I actually, right? Do you see that same lack of understanding of authenticity?
yeah. Because I use the term authenticity in my book Selling the Truth, but I find that that's kind of funny that people will put such a premium on authenticity and at the same time talk about it as though it's an exception. People want something that's authentic. Well, fine, we can use the word authentic. We could use the word true to yourself. We could use the word, honest or organic or real. But the bottom line is people want to connect with what is beneath the surface. And I hear this back from colleagues, from entrepreneurs, clients, people who say, Well, they're not going to buy from just a brand name. It's one thing if it's Coca-Cola, that's different. It's a consumer brand. But if you're providing a service, you're providing value to a community, they're going to want to identify with another human being. It's funny because somebody said, I was on a call, a group call, and somebody said, "Oh, I'm in B2B marketing," and I thought, well, I guess what you really are is in human to human marketing. You're. It's not the two businesses talking to each other with no human interaction. It's you and whoever the person on that other side is, and your two personalities are doing business together.
Right.
That's just the bottom line. And as you know, you're likely to want to do business with people you relate to, people you like, people you trust, that whole thing. And that's different from, oh, I like the logo, I like the way their I like the way they operate, I like their execution, I like their customer service. Those are all different things.
Mhm. I think for a lot of people, they may not necessarily realize that because you like their logo or the way that that brand position themselves, it connects with some part of your identity that you can't necessarily put words to. Do you see the same thing?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the words are a tool. So I think that it's I just started working with someone who's an AI ethicist, and is when I first met him, I don't think I understood half of what he said because it went over my head. And I was like, okay, this is a perfect client for me because if I can figure out what he's saying, uh, and help him communicate that to the people who want to hear it and communicate it in the way that they want to receive information, then I can really transform his business, you know? And so I think the words are important, but they only come once there's clarity. And there's
Right.
that's one of the things that I love about advertising, branding, all that stuff. It isn't just being clever. I did stand up comedy for a long time. I I understand the science and mechanics of humor and comedy, and there's a value in something that is just funny. But even in joke telling, there's truth. There's some kind of lesson. There's some kind of parable or something, right? So you do the same thing with a brand or with a product or a person. You're using words that help get the point across. But if you don't know what the point is first, then it's just a bunch of babble.
Right. Which makes a lot of sense. Where does someone start with that process? Because I imagine, at least from my experience, it's somewhat scary, somewhat messy. What do you normally like? What's your normal starting point for that?
Well, typically I work with people who are already embarked on their career. So, in other words, quite often they're mid career. I am starting to work. I just took on a client recently who's 28 years old, and has been extremely successful, and working for 7 years. So it's like this is someone who started building their business when they were 21. So already this is not a typical, just everyday kind of personality, but her goal is to be known in a certain arena for a certain expertise. And so where we start with is, okay, what is the core, what is the foundational piece of that expertise? In other words, what drove you to do what you do? What is your passion, that fire coming from? What is that? Like, what is that passion? Because if someone said, "Oh, I do this thing, it's a living, it's not a," that's not gonna that person's not gonna need what I do or benefit from what I do. But it's gonna have to start with that spark, right? That spark that sets you apart from anybody else, And then it's going to be, okay, am I benefiting? So you have that other player in the game, so to speak. So you have to identify your own spark, the person you're playing to or playing with, and then how am I going to communicate this to them? And that's verbally, that's also strategically. So you could say, well, I know I'm going to say I'm the blank who does blank and the whatever, but what's the strategy to reach those people emotionally, tactically? Without that whole picture, nothing happens. Like I'll have people call me and go, "Oh, I want to work with you. I'll work with you as soon as my website's done, or as soon as I finish this course, or as soon as I give this speech." And I'm like, this is I don't want to pressure you, but your message comes before all those things. So if you build a website and you follow through on what you're doing and you finish your website, and then you work with me for 3 months on your message and your strategy and your implementation, you're going to end up changing the website. So would you rather put the website on hold even for 3 weeks and let us work through this initial messaging thing? Because everything's going to be influenced by it. Everything, the color, and I don't do visual branding. I have colleagues that either are already doing visual branding with them, or visual branding is an outgrowth of the message. Um, if your brand is that you're the Prince of Darkness, are you going to have butterflies on your website? A little nod to Ozzy Osbourne, who passed away this week. But Prince of Darkness is an example. It's what are you putting out there that's different, and how is your commitment visible in the representation that you're putting out?
Yeah. How do you deal with the fear aspect? Because I think that there's a lot of people who are maybe afraid to step into their authentic version of whatever it is that they do because they're going to be judged or criticized. They'd rather kind of just say, hey, I'm a landscaper, rather than say everything else, because then comes the
Yeah.
questions or the judgment and everything else.
Yeah, that's amazing that you bring that up, Jim, because that is like the number one mitigating factor with prospective clients, with entrepreneurs, etc. Is that fear? There's a fear. What you just described, actually, to me, sounds like a fear of success, because what it is, well, if I project myself as all that, then they're going to expect all that. And if I don't deliver all that, now I'm falling short. And I've always subscribed to the under promise and over deliver, philosophy. But at the same time, once you over deliver, the cat's out of the bag, right? So you have to step into that, and you have to realize that, yes, the consumer, the customer, is the party that matters, right? They matter, but they don't benefit if you hide your strengths.
Right.
So I'm getting very much into I'm going to be doing a talk on the 21st of August called maximizing your success without being famous. Because a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm going to get a branding guy, or marketing, blah, blah, blah. I'm not. I was a publicist. I spent many years as a publicist. I just learned that fame is a different animal. Celebrity is a different animal. Success is in fact tied to personal recognition and personal clarity and personal brand, but it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be a household name. You don't have to be Tony Robbins. You don't have to live that life in order to be a completely successful thought leader, because it's your audience that needs to know who you are. And I help people navigate those fears, because when they come to me and they say, "Oh, I know I need to fix my personal brand," and then I say, "Okay, when do you want to get started?" And they're like, "I don't know. It's risky. Like you described, Jim. It's like it's risky. I don't know if I put myself out there." And I'm like, "Okay, you're not ready yet. You're not ready yet. You need to do a little work on your mindset first, because that it's really funny. I my whole career is dedicated to what I would call, visibility and amplification and branding. At the same time, I could count on my hands the number of clients I've had who actually were ego driven and wanted to be famous. What you would call an egotist or a narcissist or whatever. Very few. And yet my job was for a long time, getting exposure for those people. So how did they maintain their privacy and their humility while growing their reputation? And that's something that I kind of specialize in.
I love that part. I think it's so tremendously important too for people to realize, like, your authentic version of you has a tremendous impact that's just waiting to be received. And I think from what I've seen, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on this as well, it's definitely scary to step into the authentic version of you and put yourself out there as not just a landscaper, but hey, we're a landscaper who takes your money and then does philanthropy with it and blah, blah, blah. It feels scary up front, but then once you step into it, you feel this sort of freedom and you realize that, like, yeah, maybe your impact is super narrow, but it doesn't mean it's meaningless. And I think once you realize how important it is for you to operate as your authentic self in the real world, how freeing it is, first of all, but second of all, what impact you can have is amazing. I think especially, like you said, like the difference between the fame part, right? Because there's a lot of people who feel like you'll only ever be successful if you have 10 million followers, or you are known as the most important landscaper, or the landscaper everyone thinks of when they think of a landscaper. But that doesn't equal success. And I think for people to really understand what that really looks like and the impact that can happen when you operate authentically gives them sort of permission to do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. And I went through that myself. From the age of 7, I thought I was supposed to be an actor or comedian, and I was good enough at it that I was encouraged. But it isn't. I pursued stand up comedy really seriously for a time, um, and I think I just felt like that whole idea of having millions and millions of people. Because if you're gonna, you could say, well, my audience is, my fan base is small or whatever. I'm a niche performer, whatever it might be. But the idea was still that you had to be followed by the public. You had to be of interest to the public because of the things you say, or the presentation, or your essence, or your looks, or whatever it was. And I think that what really changed for me was I realized, what I've really done is support other people, champion other people, right? Like if I was doing stand-up comedy and I was an MC, that's a chance to support, a bunch of other comedians. And yeah, I want to get applause and stuff. As a publicist, you're obviously supporting your clients. As a brand transformer, I'm helping them shine. So I just realized that it would be great if some of my clients had, the followings that they want in their area. That's their goal. But a client of mine can have 50,000 followers, let's say, and that can be enormous given their niche or given their place. And so there is a difference between awareness and fame, or the fame bug, as a friend of mine used to call it. And he used to say, "You have the fame bug. You have the fame bug. You need that. You need to be on stage. You need this thing." But but I don't know. I outgrew it.
I think there's a part of that that comes with putting things in the right timeline and kind of the right order. So I think
Yeah.
like when you operate as your authentic self, the immediate payoff is not fame, it's freedom, right? And the feeling that you get of being able to just wake up and exist in the world, the easiness of existing as you is awesome. And then the more that you continue to walk that out, then the notoriety comes after that as almost like a side effect, right? Rather
Yeah.
than the thing that you're chasing.
Yeah. Very true. Because that's also the most substantive kind of awareness, right? And you're absolutely right. And I think I had it backward myself for a long time. I mean, and a lot of people do. They think, well, I'm gonna make a big splash in X, and then they can get to know the real me. And you're saying, Jim, you wear the real you every day, and your confidence alone in who you are will generate um, uh, reception for you, right? People will, in the book, I write a lot about third party validation. What's better than that? Someone says, oh, I was on with Jim Sabelico today. I really loved, the way he immediately kind of aligned with all these ideas about fame and celebrity and all these things were really interesting. That's much more powerful than saying, hi, I'm Jim Sabelico. I'm a fame expert or whatever you want to say. Right.
Right.
So um, I think that there's definitely a value in knowing yourself, and that's why I say, before you brand yourself, know yourself, because there's no better way. And going back to your authenticity question, that's the road to authenticity. Don't be, full of. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on your show, but I would say don't be full of it.
Right.
Whatever it is you're thinking, don't be full of it.
Yeah. And I guess the next question that comes to mind there, because I agree 100% with all that, but for the person listening to this, if they are not a founder, a CEO, right, operating their own business, but they are, in their eyes, a lowly employee working at a company, does that same principle, right, carry out where they should still figure out who they are authentically and operate as that, whether it's still in that role or they pursue something else? Like, does that still apply to everybody or just a founder CEO?
It applies to everybody. It applies to everybody. I had, and by the way, sometimes people who are part of the corporate infrastructure, part of the machine, even if they're a C-suite level person, I've had people in a C-suite level express to me, "Oh, I've always just been a cog in a machine." And it broke my heart to hear that. I was like, that's like crazy. I mean, that is why I didn't go into corporate, because I didn't want to be a cog in a machine. But the I am me, and I'm going to stand on my own, and I think that anyone is benefited by having a thinking of their personal brand. Because, for example, let's say you're starting out, you're the old analogy of working in the mailroom. You're working in the mailroom, you're doing whatever, you're at the bottom rung of an organization, but you carry yourself like a 360-degree human being, and you say, look, this is part of it, this is part of it. And they ask you to do something, and you know let's say it's unethical, and you say, look, my ethics, my personal belief system doesn't allow me to do this, so I can't kind of bend these rules, or I can't do that, or I can't do that to the customer, or I can't do that. And I had that. I sold computers. I was a computer salesman in New York, in Midtown. you know uh I didn't want to BS the customer about anything, which I thought at the time made me a bad salesman, although I ended up being successful at it, because that's where selling the truth came from. was the idea is, yeah, I can sell this person this thing if they want it, they need it, but I just got to sell them the truth. I can't sell them on something that isn't real. That was my brand. And so I was a quote unquote lowly cog in the machine, in the sense that I was one salesman on a line of 10 salesmen in one of the busiest kind of stores in Manhattan. I didn't feel like I had an identity for a long time, you know, but I found my core values, and that was my personal brand. When there was a manager there that, the everybody was disgruntled. I had already accepted another job, a new job in advertising, which was the business I had planned to be in. And I'd accepted a new job, and I was like my last day, and the salespeople had a walk out, because of in protest. And I walked out with them, and the manager said, "Why are you walking out? You're leaving. You should stay and make commissions today, while the rest of them are protesting." And I said no, because I'm with them. It doesn't matter that I'm leaving. And that's just a decision you make, but that's your personal brand.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree tremendously. And actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because I used to work in a mailroom many, many, many years ago. And it was an interesting job because it teaches you a lot about people skills, and it teaches you a lot about yourself. And a lot of that time, even though it felt like a lowly role, you're right, it helped to expose kind of your core values and who you are. And a lot of that same principle of like how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I do really want to emphasize, like, for the person listening to this who thinks maybe the thing that you're doing might be unimportant, it's not, right? And feeling like a cog in the machine sucks. So, right, try and get out of that mindset and understand that, like, even if you have this one tiny role, do that really well. Like, if nothing else, but for your own standards, because that's how you carry yourself, right? And I think once you start to really value who you are, then it kind of trickles down into everything you do, right? And that goes into your finances, your relationship, your fitness, your literally everything. Um, and that helps kind of reinforce that set of core values and your principles and your identity. And I love how you said that. So for
Thank you.
you, did you like, what was your experience leading up into this? I know you talked about, right, selling computers and everything else. Like, I want to learn more about your journey into where you are right now, and kind of how you refined this process.
Yeah. Well, the one word that everybody seems to use is eclectic. No, you've had an eclectic career. Now, um, it it is eclectic in the sense that I think, looking at it from the beginning and then seeing where I am, you wouldn't necessarily figure that out. You wouldn't plot that out as a plan. But looking back, everything makes perfect sense. So like as I mentioned, when I was a kid, I thought it was going to all be about entertainment, comedy, acting. I went to School of Visual Arts in New York to study um, screenwriting and filmmaking. And the plan was to write movies and, get in movies that I wrote and do all of those things. And I, someone at the school was working as a rep, as a sales rep for art directors in advertising. She got me a meeting with someone who was a rep for directors, commercial directors. And the chairman of SVA had said to me, you should take an advertising course because you might make a really good ad man, which was the last thing that I thought I wanted to do. And he said, you could sell a line on a piece of paper. Like, you have really compelling, you're great at selling your ideas and all that stuff. And at the time, I thought it was like a come down. But the fact is, I took a course, and um, I got a job working for this rep. Carl Forsberg was his name, became one of my most important mentors. And I was representing directors of TV commercials Um, and that was really interesting because I repping means selling, but I was young, so I was a support person. And what I did was write bios, press releases, stories. So I told stories about these artists and then we were taking on music companies and editorial companies. And before I knew it, I was writing bios and sending out PR and becoming a publicist for artists in the commercial production world. And that became my niche. And I moved to Los Angeles. I joined a company called Headquarters Films, which was one of the top 10 commercial production companies in the world at the time. And I became their West Coast head of sales, but their head of PR. And a couple years later, struck out on my own, took them on as a client, and my first client. And lo and behold, I was a successful publicist in a niche, but still feeling like, wait a minute, what about the guy who was supposed to be a stand-up comedian and a screenwriter and a, you know, and an actor and all this stuff? Here I came to LA thinking I came because I had a manager that named Catherine James, who was a wonderful manager, and she had been Quentin Tarantino's manager, and she signed me as a screenwriter. And that's what I thought. I thought my day job was advertising and production, and I was gonna, just jump ship on that as soon as I sold my first big script. I got little writing assignments. Like my first writing assignment was $1,500. Then I got up to like $3,500, and then finally I was making like 7 or 8,000 a script. But to do like one of those a year, that's a substantial addition to your income, but you're not going to leave your job for $8,000 a year. So I still thought that brass ring is what I wanted. And, but I was married. We were having kids, it was like, I was taking on all the responsibilities that come with that day job that you can't you can't jump off that train and then just go into the arts. And so I did it concurrently. I would do stand up in New York. I did stand up in LA for like 10 years, where I really thought at some point I might transition out of what I'm doing, and I might just become a stand-up comedian. And I think, and that was in 2011, or by 2015 I was at the end of that season, so to speak. But that was 10 years ago. That wasn't a long time ago. And I was doing stand-up comedy every night. I was doing shows. I played all the clubs in New York and LA, but I wasn't. I joke that I had achieved everything a stand-up comedian could achieve, short of making a living at it. I wasn't making money at it. I just was doing it and getting little gigs here and there. And I was like, the pandemic kind of, I think, gave me a reboot or a wake up call, because my business, my marketing, and it was mostly sneaker marketing, working for sneaker brands. That was, all shut down during the pandemic. And I had time to reflect on, okay, like we all did, what do I really want to do? That's like if you had to sum up the pandemic for grown-ups and adults and, people in business, you'd say, what do I really want to do? And, and I decided I wanted to, first of all, meet as many people as possible and expand my world. So podcasting became like a natural. And then I was like, I want to work with people on their personal brands, because that's what I've always done, whether they were a commercial director or, a business owner or a comedian. Also, I've worked with comedians. It was that I was working on their brand, and that gave me the most joy. And so I just developed that model over the last 5 years, where I realize now it's those people that, like I've kind of said, where it's those people who want to be successful. They don't necessarily want to be famous, but they want to be acknowledged for their expertise. and they have the goods. And when you have the goods, you don't need the hype. And so they're not looking for hype. They're not looking for people to spin a bunch of nonsense around and all of a sudden it looks great. And then people hire them. It's the opposite. It's that they're drawn, they're magnetized to this person who has this business, and they are compelled to explore it, but the meat is really there, the substance is really there, and those are the clients that I get most excited about. The meat is there, the substance is there, the packaging may not be up to snuff yet, the messaging may not be on target for their audience yet, but they have it, they have the goods.
Thank you for sharing all that. And the part that I hear when you shared that was almost that people just need the permission to go out and do the thing that they believe that they should be doing anyway, but they feel like they're afraid to do. Because what I'm hearing in your story is you identified early on you were great at sales, which is really connecting with people. And you had this amazing ability to connect deeply with people, which could be seen in your stand-up comedy, right? You're relating to people, sharing your life and experiences and making it fun for them. And then you pursued a different route and then eventually wound up coming back to this version of you that's really connecting with people and helping them see their authentic selves. And it almost makes me wonder, right? Obviously, we don't want to diminish the journey because obviously that teaches you a lot about yourself. But it does make me wonder if you could have taken that leap into doing what you do now years earlier by just sort of betting on yourself and saying, hey, I have a natural ability to do this. Can I step into it and start pursuing it? And the reason why I mention that is, again, for the person listening to this, if they have that calling that they feel they're very good at X, Y, and Z, to continue to pursue that, not worry about how do you define it? How does it fit in? What is it perceived as? But the permission to go out there and just be authentically you and share your most authentic version with the world and believing that that's going to produce fruit. Do you see the same sort of thing?
Yeah, because I wouldn't say, looking back, that I would change anything, right? And if I had made a decision 10 years ago to do what I'm doing today, I wouldn't have the 10 years more experience in life, in business, in entrepreneurship, in travel, in like 100 different areas. So it's the sum total of everything that I've experienced. And it's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I felt like it's not a memoir so much as a semoir, I call it. It's like a semi-memoir. It has anecdotes from my life, but only as pertain to my thoughts on business and truth in advertising. But I remember all of these experiences going back to my early 20s, in the book. I mean, I go back even further in some cases, but these are all pivotal moments. So I was pursuing, as if you asked me up until the age of 50, or I'm now 58. So if you asked me up until 50 or 53 or something, and you said, what are you pursuing? I was pursuing a career as a performer, essentially. Like that's how I might think of it. Well, I do all these things. I've had these businesses. I've done this. I've accomplished that. But if you ask me what is the one award that you would really like to win, I would say, oh, I want an Oscar. I want to, that's what I dreamed of having when I was 7 years old, giving an Oscar speech, whatever. But without that, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. And now, it's like, well, I get the gratification that I get from working with the people I work with, and I'm excited about that, and I'm good at it. And I think to use your phraseology, I've given myself the permission to be good at what I'm really good at, what I'm exceptional at. And I think that my advice to someone would be, yeah, pursue your dream. Pursue your dream. Your dream may change, and you may wake up tomorrow with another dream, but you're not going to get there without going with that fire. So whatever lights that fire, go with it. For me, it changed during the pandemic. That fire just evolved, but it wasn't. The important thing is, there's no regret. Like, oh, I wish I would have done this or I wish I would have done that, because I did all that. I did road gigs. I did like open mics. I did bar shows. I did clubs. I did all those things. So I can't regret. I don't have like anything I didn't try, anything I didn't do. It was more the dream evolved.
Yeah,
You know.
I love that. I want to thank you for sharing all that you shared, both from like an educational perspective and helping people understand the process of really stepping into their authentic self, and your personal story, because I think it will resonate with a lot of people and give them the permission and courage to step into who they feel called to be. And what greater gift is there than that, to be able to just wake up and be you and not worry about the criticism or the judgment or anything else. And again, true pleasure to sit down and have this conversation with you. I thank you tremendously. How can we support you going forward?
Well, thank you, Jim. It was really an honor and a pleasure to sit down with you. I love the conversation. Um, I appreciate that. I think that if people go to yesbrandbuilders.com, they can find all of my stuff. It will lead them to the book. They can also go to sellingthetruthbook.com and purchase the book which is selling through Barnes and Noble. Um, but they can definitely support that way. I think that my goal with that book is to help people in life and business, not just how do you become successful in your career, but how do you become a successful human being. Um, and so I'm very proud of that book. That's one of the big achievements of my life that I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have known that I'm going to write a book that I'm really proud of. I was writing screenplays, and I was and you know I had a movie that Bruce Campbell starred in that I wrote. I thought that was more a highlight, but it's all cool stuff to me. But yeah, so sellingthetruthbook.com and yesbrandbuilders.com.
Good. I love it. Well, thank you again. It's been a true pleasure, and we'll see you around.
Thanks, Jim.